One hook. Have you ever noticed how pain doesn't always come from what happened, but from what your mind keeps replaying? The message, the tone, the betrayal, on loop. And the more you fight it, the tighter it grips you. Here's the ancient truth the Stoics understood. Pain feeds on resistance. The moment you stop wrestling the past, it starts losing its hold. In this video, I'll show you the Stoic response that doesn't numb you or make you cold, it makes you free. But before we go deeper, if you want more calm, powerful Stoic lessons that actually work in real life, subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers right now. New stories, daily Stoic wisdom, and practical tools to steady your mind every week. Now, let's begin with the first moment everything changes. The instant you realize you can't control what hurt you, only what you do with it. Too relatable modern story. Ethan didn't call it heartbreak. He called it being realistic. He went to work, answered emails, smiled at the right moments, then went home and sat in the same chair like it was a courtroom. His mind replayed the same scene. A friend he trusted. A promise made too easily. And the quiet moment he realized he'd been used. Nothing dramatic happened on the outside. No shouting. No doors slammed. Just a sentence, casual, almost careless, that made something inside him go cold. He told himself he was over it, but his body didn't believe him. His chest tightened when his phone buzzed. His jaw clenched in the shower. He'd scroll late at night, searching for proof that the other person was getting what they deserved. Some consequence, some karma, some public downfall. And every time he found nothing, the pain came back, sharper. Claire's pain looked different, but it lived in the same place. She wasn't angry, she was tired. The kind of tired that makes you forget what joy feels like. She had learned to keep her voice soft, her needs small, her expectations lower than the floor. People called her easygoing. They didn't see the way she flinched when someone raised their voice, or how she apologized for things that weren't her fault. One evening, they met after work at a small cafe that smelled like espresso and raincoats. Ethan stared at his cup like it had answers. Claire watched the streetlights blur in the window. Then Ethan said, almost whispering, "I hate that they still have this much space in my head." Claire didn't offer a motivational quote. She just nodded and admitted, "Sometimes I think the worst part isn't what they did. It's that I keep carrying it, like I owe it something." They sat there with that truth between them. Two adults in a normal city, living normal lives, both quietly controlled by an old injury they couldn't touch, but couldn't put down. Three Stoic reframe. Ethan thought healing meant getting an apology. Claire thought healing meant finally understanding why it happened. That's how most of us are wired. We assume closure comes from the outside, from another person's words, from an explanation that makes the hurt make sense. Stoicism flips that assumption, not by pretending the pain isn't real, but by changing what the pain is allowed to control. Marcus Aurelius wrote a line that sounds simple until you live it. You have power over your mind, not outside events. In other words, the injury may be outside your control. The meaning you attach to it is not. The Stoics would say the first wound is what happened. The second wound is what you add. The replay, the fantasy arguments in your head, the "if I had said this," the "they shouldn't get away with it," the obsession with fairness. That second wound is optional, and it's the one that keeps bleeding. Claire stared at the table and realized how often she wasn't suffering in the present. She was suffering in a story where she was always the one who tried harder, the one who forgave first, the one who had to shrink so others could stay comfortable. Ethan realized his pain wasn't just betrayal. It was the belief that betrayal meant he was foolish, weak, less than. The Stoic reframe is brutal and freeing. Your pain is not proof of their power. It's proof of your attachment. Attachment to respect. Attachment to being understood. Attachment to an outcome you never actually owned. So the question changes. Not, how do I make them feel what I felt? But, what part of this is mine to govern? Not, why did they do this to me? But, what do I do with what happened, starting today? When you stop demanding the past behave differently, the past loses its grip. The event stays the same, but you stop giving it fresh oxygen every morning. And that is where real calm begins. 4 Core Stoic Principle. The core Stoic principle is simple to say and hard to live. You don't control what happens to you, only what you choose to do with it. Not the person who hurt you, not the timing, not the unfairness, only your response. And the Stoics weren't saying that to sound tough. They were giving you a way out of the trap. Because the trap is this: when someone wounds you, you hand them the remote to your inner life. Your mood becomes a hostage. Your attention becomes their property. You wake up thinking about them, not because they deserve it, but because your mind is still trying to rewrite the past into a version that feels just. Epictetus put it bluntly: it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. The event is the event. The judgment is the story you glue onto it. This means I can't trust anyone. This means I wasn't enough. This means I'll never be safe. That story feels like protection, but it's actually a cage. So the Stoic move is not to be positive. It's to separate facts from judgments. Facts: someone lied, someone left, someone didn't care. Judgments: I'm doomed, I'm weak, I'll never recover. The Stoic asks, which of these is real, and which is something I'm rehearsing? Then comes the hardest part: letting pain exist without feeding it. Not suppressing it, not dramatizing it, letting it rise, speak, and pass, like a wave that doesn't need you to become it. You can feel grief without building a shrine to it. You can feel anger without signing a long-term lease in it. Claire practiced this like a discipline. When the memory returned, she'd name it. That's the old wound. She'd breathe, soften her shoulders, and return to the present moment. Her feet on the floor, her hands on the cup, her life still here. Ethan practiced it too. Every time his mind reached for revenge, he redirected it toward governance. What can I do right now that I respect? That's the principle. Govern your mind, or your mind will be governed by the injury. 5 Modern application. At first, Ethan tried the old way. Distraction. Work harder. Scroll longer. Date casually. Pretend he was fine. But the moment the room got quiet, the pain returned. Because it wasn't asking for entertainment. It was asking for attention. So he tested the Stoic method like an experiment. The next time the memory hit, late at night, phone in hand, that familiar heat rising in his chest, he didn't chase it. He didn't text anyone. He didn't open social media to look for proof. He sat still and named the moment. This is judgment. Not, this is truth. Then he asked one clean question. What is actually happening right now? Right now, he was safe. Right now, he was in his apartment. Right now, the betrayal wasn't occurring. It was being replayed. That didn't erase the event, but it broke the spell. Claire practiced it in a different place, at work, when someone's tone clipped too sharply and her body jumped into old fear. She used to shrink immediately, apologize, explain, overgive. Now she paused. She put one hand on the edge of her desk. felt the solidness, and thought, fact or story? Fact, someone is stressed. Story, I'm in trouble. Fact, a voice is loud. Story, I'm unsafe. She didn't become cold. She became precise. She responded to the facts, not the panic. She spoke slower. She asked one clarifying question instead of rushing to please. And something surprising happened. Her nervous system learned a new pattern. Ethan's pattern changed too. He stopped checking if the other person was suffering. He started checking if he was governed. When his mind reached for revenge, he redirected it into action he could respect. A workout, a journal line, a hard, honest conversation with himself. I don't need them to pay. He wrote, I need me to be free. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it lost its daily throne. It stopped being the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. Some days it returned like weather. And on those days, they did the Stoic thing. They didn't argue with the storm. They tightened the roof. They stayed inside their own command. 6. Stoic quote moment. Marcus Aurelius had a way of turning chaos into a single clean line. He wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. That isn't poetry, it's a warning. Whatever you rehearse in your mind, rage, suspicion, humiliation, eventually becomes the emotional tint you see the world through. Not because the world changed, but because your inner lens did. Ethan realized he'd been staining his own days without noticing. He'd wake up and feed the same thought. They got away with it. By noon, everything felt sharper. Small inconveniences turned into proof that life was unfair. Even good news felt temporary, like it could be stolen. The betrayal wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a filter. Claire heard the quote and felt exposed. She saw how her thoughts had been dyeing her life gray. Keep your needs small. Don't make trouble. If you relax, something bad will happen. Those thoughts sounded like survival, but they were quietly painting every room with tension. So they practiced one deliberate shift, not fake optimism, a cleaner thought. A thought that didn't deny the hurt, but didn't worship it either. Ethan replaced, they got away with it, with, my peace is not their reward. Claire replaced, I'm unsafe, with, I am here, and I can choose. That's the Stoic quote in motion. Your mind doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be governed. Because the color of your thoughts becomes the color of your life, whether you notice it or not. 7. Quiet call to action. You don't need to erase what happened to be free from it. You just need to stop letting it run your inner world. That's the quiet Stoic victory. Not revenge. Not a dramatic comeback. Just the moment you realize, I can feel this, and still choose. Because pain only keeps its grip when it becomes your identity. When you wake up and say, this is who I am now. The Stoics would call that a surrender you don't have to make. You can carry the lesson without carrying the weight. You can remember without reopening the wound. You can let the past be true, without letting it be in charge. So here's the practice, starting today. When the memory returns, separate the fact from the story. Name the judgment. Return to the present. Ask, what is mine to govern in this moment? Do that often enough, and you'll notice something powerful. The pain may still visit, but it won't live there anymore. If this helped you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who's been carrying a quiet hurt. Like it so more people can find this kind of calm. And I want to hear from you. Comment one sentence. What's one thought you're ready to stop feeding? And if you're building a stronger mind in 2025, one that stays steady in the storm, subscribe to Legacy of Thinkers. More daily Stoic wisdom. modern psychology-inspired clarity, and stories that help you live lighter every week.